Hello, this is Dana from We Learn to Share, and today's lesson is about basic French. This is class number 1, and we're going to learn about French alphabets, abbreviating vowels, accents, tones based on types of sentences, and when not to link pronunciations. But before starting the lesson, we have to know why we have to learn French. First, French is the 5th most used language in the world. Second, there are more job opportunities. We can always go to France and work in France, so French is definitely a language worth learning. Third, there are a lot of vocab words that are related to English and French, so it's easier to learn French, and also you can understand roots of English while learning French. Lastly, it is very fun. If you can't understand descriptions in museums and whip up a conversation with the locals in France, that would be a great experience and also an opportunity. Okay, so let's start with the French alphabet. First, starting with the vowels. A, E, I, O, U. First, A. For example, there is ami, aller, attaque. Then thé, lait, table, tasser. I, fille, livre, lit. Then O, dos, rose, trop. Finally, U, bus, tu, amuse. There are also some nasal vowels in French. So first, un, pantalon, enfant. Then, en, moins, simple. Then, on, talon, bon, son, 11, maison. Lastly, en, parfum. I want to remind you that you have to repeat after me, and also I recommend searching up the dictionary pronunciation too. Then let's move on to the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Now let's move on to the accents. So these are the 5 accents commonly used in French. There are more accents, but they're more like connotations than accents. So if you see the chart, you can see that I have written down the different types of accents, and you have to be careful when you're writing them down because they look all different. So let's start with the first one. Accent aigu only applies to E. For example, there are été and bébé. Second is accent grave. It applies to A, E, and U. For example, there are la, mère. Third, accent circonflexe. It applies to all vowels. And for example, there is rêve or il. Fourth, tréma. It only applies to E, I, and U. For example, there is Noël and naïf. Lastly, there is se dire. It applies to C. For example, there is ça or garçon. Now we are going to learn about abbreviating vowels. By abbreviating vowels, I mean changing the vowel that comes after the consonant into an apostrophe when it meets with a silent H or vowels. So for example, in the first one, you can see that le, la turns into L apostrophe when it meets with the silent H here, So you shouldn't write le you should write l'homme. And this is supposed to be grammatically correct. So you have to be careful when you're writing French down and be careful about abbreviating these vowels, because if you don't abbreviate them, you're going to be grammatically wrong. Moving on to the second one, du, de, la can be abbreviated into de, L apostrophe. For example, de la o should be written as de lo. Third, je, me, te, se can be, the E in these words can all be turned into apostrophes when it meets with a silent H or a vowel. So for example, je ai should be je. Fourth, se can be C apostrophe when it meets the conditions that I explained before. So for example, se est should be se. And fifth, que can become QU apostrophe. So, que es can become qu'es. So, for example, qu'est-ce que c'est? What is this? Sixth, de, de can be turned into D apostrophe. For example, des affaires should be turned into d'affaires. And we're almost done. Ne can be shortened into N apostrophe. Ne es, nes. And lastly, SI can be shortened into S apostrophe. S'il vous plaît. Moving on to sentence tones. By sentence tones, I mean what kind of tone you should speak in, depending on the sentence type. If it's a sentence, you should start with a rising intonation and then end with a falling intonation. So, je vais à Paris la semaine prochaine. You see what I did? So, je vais à Paris, if this is a rising intonation, and then la semaine prochaine, it's a falling intonation. So if you're just stating something or just saying a random sentence that is not a question, command, or exclamation, you are likely to follow this tone. But when you're saying a question, when you're asking someone about something, things get a little bit complicated. So if you have an interrogative, so by interrogative, I mean that when, why, or how, these kind of things that are used commonly when you're asking a question. You don't use an intonation, or you just use a falling intonation. So, the example sentence, qu'est-ce que c'est? Qu'est-ce que c'est means, what is this? And in that sentence, there is an interrogative, what? So since it has an interrogative, you should not use an intonation, or you should use a falling intonation. And there is another case when you don't have an interrogative. Then you should use a rising intonation, just like you do it in English. So for example, can I have a cup of water? I'm raising my voice. This is a rising intonation. So that should equally happen in French too. So here, vous aimez Paris? Do you like Paris? I'm raising my voice. This is a rising intonation. Third, when you're commanding someone to do something, you should use a falling intonation to accentuate the word with a command. Ouvre la fenêtre. This means to open the window. And I should accentuate the word ouvre because it contains the word open. So I should accentuate that word and end with a falling intonation. Last but not least, an exclamation. So you can just use a rising or falling intonation. All two is available. So for example, quelle chaleur? How hot? And I am exclamating that the weather is so hot, so I can just use a rising and then a falling intonation. Comment? I can also use a rising intonation here. And then linking pronunciations. Okay, by linking pronunciations, I mean pronouncing the words in a whole bundle. So linking the consonants and the vowels, the pronunciations all together as if it's just one word. Let's start with the first one, the article and then the adjective and then the noun. So for example, here it says les anciens amis. This means the old friends. I have the article, the, I have the adjective, old, and I have the noun, friends. And here you can see that les anciens amis, I linked the S in les anciens, and the A in ancien, and then I again linked anciens amis, the S and A here. I'm pronouncing it as if it's a whole bundle, and that's how you link pronunciations. Let's see another type of when to link the pronunciations. When you have an adverb and then an adjective, you should link the pronunciation. For example, it says here, very kind, très aimable. I link the pronunciations again. Third, when you have a preposition, an article, and then a noun, en été. This means being either in English, and it might not seem very sure that you have a preposition, an article, and noun, but if you get to learn French more and you understand the context of the sentence, you can see that this is a preposition, an article, and then a noun. So this is an example of the type. Fourth, a preposition and then a pronoun. Chez elle. This means at her place. And you should link the pronunciation too, like I did, chez elle, like this. And last but not least, a phrase, pas à pas. This means step by step in English, and you should link the pas à, the S and the A here, pas à pas. But when you start to learn French more and you speak French more, you would kind of find yourself linking all these pronunciations together. And there are definitely times when you shouldn't do that. And these 5 types are the most common times when you shouldn't link the pronunciations. First, when the subject is a noun, you shouldn't link the pronunciation of the noun and the verb. So for example, cet étudiant est grand. Cet étudiant est grand. I didn't link the T and the E here. Cet étudiant est grand. I didn't do this. I said cet étudiant est grand. This means this student is tall, and I didn't link the pronunciation of this student and tall because you shouldn't link it. The second one, if you have a singular noun and then an adjective, you shouldn't link the pronunciation of those two. So for example here, un enfant aimable. This means a kind child. Aimable is kind. Un enfant is a child. And I didn't say un enfant aimable. I said un enfant aimable. You should definitely not link those pronunciations. Third, after et, which means and. So for example here we have un livre et une plume. I didn't say un livre et une plume. I said et une plume. I didn't link the pronunciations. This means a book and a feather. And when you have the word et, which means and, in a phrase or something, you shouldn't link the pronunciations. Fourth, in front of H, which is not silent. So hear me out. Definitely most of the H's are silent in French, so like I said, you should link the pronunciations or like abbreviate the vowels as such when you have these silent H's, but there are some H's that are not silent. So for example, here we have héros. This means hero, and definitely the H is not silent because I have this as an example here. So the pronunciation should be les héros, not les héros. This is the most common mistake that people do. And finally, we have in front of oui. So oui means, you guys should all know this, yes. And in front of oui, we shouldn't link the pronunciations. For example, I have here mais oui. This means but yes, and I didn't say mais oui. I said mais oui. You should definitely try to don't link these two pronunciations. Au revoir. This is it for today. And what I just said, it means bye in French. And I'm gonna say this after every lesson has ended. So thank you for listening to my very first lesson. I think it might be crude, but I hope you understand it. And if you have any more questions, you have my email and my phone number, and you can always contact me about my lessons. Thank you. Au revoir.